Tariffs impact the US economy, which is the largest economy in the world, and therefore impacts each and every one of us and how the United States exists as part of the global economy, our relationships with other countries, the goods that we have access to, and the prices that we pay. So this is a big deal. This topic of tariffs, although you can kind of get into the eye-glazing conversation about economic policy, this is one of the reasons why this story really matters. And as we've talked about for the last several months, we've seen several small businesses challenge the Trump administration and the power of this administration to unilaterally impose tariffs. In fact, we talked to one of these small business owners, Emily Lee. She runs a company called Simplified, which deals with a whole bunch of ways to simplify your life, including planners and recipe books and all sorts of things. She was great to talk to. I'll link to that interview so you can listen to it. When it first came out, these tariffs, Emily, along with others, decided to file a lawsuit. This is the lawsuit that now has wound up in the Supreme Court. And so let me just give you a little bit of an overview of this because the stakes are very high. The administration is arguing that the president has this power to impose tariffs basically at will because of a 1977 International Emergency Economic Powers Act. The small businesses that have come together to file this case, this lawsuit, say that the president can't act. This sort of law didn't empower the president to unilaterally act in this way. The administration's argument is that the White House has declared a national emergency in a few different capacities. Remember, when President Trump came into office, he declared two emergencies. One was about the illicit drug trafficking that has been happening regarding our border that involves many different countries, whether we're talking about Mexico or talking about China, and also a national emergency regarding illegal immigration. So let me step back. The illicit drug trafficking and illegal immigration is one emergency. Then you have a second emergency is a lack of reciprocity in bilateral trade relationships in April. So there's these two ways that the president is saying we are in an emergency situation. Therefore, I can act in a way that helps get us out of this national emergency. And one of the ways I'm going to do this is use tariffs to our benefit. There are those that say that is not a power that the president gets to have by himself, that it actually is a power that belongs perhaps to Congress, but certainly not just to the White House. Otherwise, the president has too much power. I want you to listen to how the president talked about this in the 16 Minutes interview that just aired last night.
You can't have Congress. This has to be quick and nimble.
Well, you just finished that sentence. You said, if they take away my power to do tariffs, what?
It would be a very sad day for the United States of America. We're making a lot of money. We're respected again all over the world. We have great national security. Let me give you an example. With China, they were, very strongly threatening us, frankly, with the rare earths. And then I said, well, if you're going to play that card, I'm going to put a 100% tariff on over and above what you're already paying, which was 55%. Which was very high, a lot of money coming in, tremendous money like we've never seen. I'm going to put a 100% tariff on everything over and above. And you know what happened? We got a phone call 20 minutes later. We'd like to talk. If they take away the right to tariff, if we're forced to use Congress to approve, they can't approve anything. They would be sitting around for years debating whether or not we should use tariffs.
You want that power. You want that executive power.
You need it to protect our country. This is a national security. Tariffs are national security. If you take away the right to tariff, and remember this, tariffs have been used against us.
And can you just answer that question that tariffs have led to inflation? They have led to an increase in cost of living for most Americans.
We have no inflation.
Okay, I wanted to run that soundbite for a few different reasons, including those remarks just at the end about inflation. But you can see how the president saying this is a power that he needs in order to negotiate. And here I think we're getting a better understanding about the stakes of how the Supreme Court rules on this, because this is a cornerstone of the president's economic and foreign policies, is having the power to wield these tariffs in the way that they believe are fit to these different countries in order to get better results for the United States of America. What this act does not mention in it, so again, International Emergency Economic Powers Act, it does not mention specifically tariffs, taxes, or duties, but it does permit the president to regulate the importation, so imports, of any property in which any foreign country or national thereof has any interest after declaring an emergency. So these are the arguments. How the Supreme Court is going to rule on this, TBD. And typically for some of these cases that we're hearing in the fall, we're not going to get a decision until May or June, sometimes early July. But really, that June period is when things really heat up. You get a lot of decisions from the Supreme Court. In this case, we could see potentially an emergency decision just because this is happening right now. It's affecting small businesses right now. It's affecting consumers right now. It's affecting the way that the White House is leading. So those are a couple things to watch for as we take a look at this case. It's going to be heard midweek, is not only how the justices feel about the questions that are being asked, but also could we get any indication that we could see a decision that's a little bit sooner than typical? So you heard that little back and forth about inflation. I want to talk to you about that because I'm seeing this conversation come up quite a bit, whether it's with the president in 60 Minutes or otherwise. You have those that are saying, wait a minute, there's no inflation. What are you talking about? And then others are saying, wait, there is inflation and the American people are really struggling with it. So I just want to point this out to you because I think this could be very helpful as we continue to talk about the economy in the future. There's two different ways to look at inflation. We can look at an inflation rate. This is something that we want to look at sort of like a thermometer. The higher the reading, the hotter inflation is. And typically, you don't want hot inflation. We want to keep the inflation rate down. We're talking about our rates. We're not talking about a specific price. So if we take a look at this, let me go ahead and pull this up. I was taking a look at some data that was available for each presidential term for the presidents over the last several years. You can see under Jimmy Carter, the overall inflation rate during his term in office was just below 10%. If you go a few bars down from that, you can see for President Biden, it was just under 5%. If we go down a little bit further, you can see that President Trump during his first term, inflation was hovering right around 2.5%. So when President Trump is talking about, wait a minute, we don't have inflation, he's likely referring to the inflation rate. We do expect to see inflation around 2-ish%. In general, that indicates a healthy economy, or it's been understood that way. Well, why would that be? Wouldn't we rather just see zero? Well, the reason why we want to see an inflation rate of a few percentage points is that it indicates a growing economy. I expect to pay more for milk than I did a couple years ago. Than I paid during the first Trump administration. Then my parents paid. We can go even further back. It would make sense to you, right? The economy has grown. We're bigger. And therefore, I'm not going to pay the same price as what my parents paid for certain goods at the same age that I am right now. We expect to see a little bit of inflation. We expect to see things are growing and moving. And so we want to see a little bit of inflation in the economy. We don't want to see stagflation or deflation. Those are different things, but let's just talk about inflation. The higher the inflation, the less your dollar buys you. So that's why we want to see inflation rates around 2%. What Norah O'Donnell in 60 Minutes was likely talking about, again, kind of reading through, there was this constant disagreement about inflation during this interview. It's talking about actual prices and affordability. So yes, there can be inflation in the economy, a presence of inflation, but the question then becomes, well, what does it actually cost for me to buy things? And when we see the cost of goods, because we do see inflation still in the economy, we see the cost of goods have continued to go up. They're not going down. We're not suddenly paying a lot less for things than we did last year at the same time, with the exception maybe of egg prices, because we know there was a lot of different dynamics at play in that particular market. So yes, both things can be true. The president can say, well, we don't have that much inflation because the inflation rate, I think at last read, depending on which one you look at, is right 2.5%, 3%. And then what Norah O'Donnell, a journalist, is saying is, well, wait a minute, people feel like they're not able to buy as much as they once did. Their dollar is buying them less. Affordability is not as accessible. Therefore, they're feeling the pangs of inflation, but more likely affordability in general. And so they're both talking about important topics, but they're not talking about the same thing when it comes to inflation. So I hope that's clear. We tend in the news to try to use sometimes economic data or theory or terms, and sometimes we don't use them the right way. The reason why I say that is because I was definitely guilty of that as a young journalist with just no experience in business news at all. I had to learn quickly working at Forbes, working at a local news desk where I helped produce the business show. It was a lot of learning because I didn't come from a business background. I never ran a business. And also I didn't take business classes in school. I wasn't a business major. So there are times that sometimes in the news too, we're sort of conflating a lot under one term. And with inflation, we can do that. So what would be a better way to talk about that issue is actually to acknowledge with the president of the United States. And some of you have asked, well, what would you do different with the 60 Minutes interview? I think what Nora O'Donnell was touching on is really important because it's what Democrats are really talking about as well as a way to try to make inroads against Republicans. I don't think she was talking about it because she's being partisan. I'm just saying this topic is coming up a lot about affordability. So that's really important to all of us. We want to be able to go to the grocery store and feel like we're getting something for our money. It doesn't feel good when you go to the grocery store and you spend $100 and you get one bag of goods and you're like, what did I buy? So one way one could approach this question is to say, when the president says, hey, we don't have any inflation, to say, yeah, you're correct. We're seeing the inflation rate is much lower than during the Biden administration. That's true. The inflation rate has gone down. But the American people don't feel like their dollar is buying them more. It feels more and more from my reporting from this data that their dollar is buying them less. What's your plan to make sure that the American dream is affordable to every American? You see, so you change, if we keep using that term inflation is too generic in general. We're not going to get an answer on this. And the reality is that the government is somewhat limited about what they can or cannot do when it comes to pricing. One of the ways that they can do something has to do with tariffs and the price on imports, what's going on import-export business. So that would be one way that one could approach that topic. But I did see a lot of that, and I'm seeing a lot more of that, of conflating the term with inflation. And I think we have to be a lot more careful because I think these are really important conversations to have. So we'll watch to see what's happening with the Supreme Court. This is a very big case. It is in the highest court of the land. It has a lot of impact potentially on all of us. Could the Supreme Court rule against the president? And then what happens to the president's policies? Big question. The Treasury Secretary seems to suggest that there's other ways that the president would continue to levy tariffs with the president. And what this president values is having that power to be able to go onto the world stage and have these negotiations. So big case to watch. And I want to make sure that you had a little bit of information on that.